Hi, I'm Jane Iyer and I run a small tours business here in Singapore called Jane's Singapore Tours. We specialise in culture, heritage and history of Singapore, of which I'm a great fan. I'm also a great fan of the theatre here, so I'm absolutely delighted today to be supporting Pangdemonium in their Pangsalot 2020 fundraiser. We've supported many of their productions in terms of events, and also personally my husband and I come to all of their performances, so delighted to say to be supporting them. So today I'm going to show you a little bit of the Civic District. Now, all of you probably live in Singapore, you're probably all familiar with this area, but I'd just like to tell you a few things that you may not know, and just to remind you again of its beauty. So essentially this is in many ways the oldest part of Singapore, because basically Raffles came ashore somewhere nearby. We have a statue to him just down by the river. We're not sure that he landed exactly there, but somewhere in that general vicinity. And of course he signed the treaty on the 6th of February 1819 with the Sultan for the East India Company to set up what they called a factory here, in other words a trading post here in Singapore, and that all happened just over there on the Padang, which we'll take a look at in a moment. But firstly, let me introduce you to one of my favourite animals in Singapore, this lovely little elephant. I absolutely adore him. He really could do with a lick of paint, but other than that he's absolutely perfect. And of course he was presented to Singapore by the King of Siam, as it was in those days, the King of Thailand, King Chulalongkorn in 1871, as it says here. Now, why did he present an elephant to Singapore? Well, he came here to visit. He was the first Siamese king to ever leave Thailand, or Siam, and he came here partly because he had been educated by Anna Leon Owens of the King and I fame. And she had a connection with Singapore. She had lived in Singapore, and so they had mutual friends, and he decided he would come and visit Singapore. He was part of the Thai monarchy trying to look a little bit more broadly around the world. He came here, he liked it so much that he decided to buy a plot of land in Orchard Road, hence the reason that we still have the Thai embassy over there. And at the end of his trip he gave this little elephant to Singapore as a gift of thanks for his visit. So it's a lovely story. If you want to know more about the King and I and Anna Leon Owens, please come on two of our tours, because we can talk about that. Now here, I'm sure this is an area that's familiar to you all, but again, let's look back in time to the time that the Padang was called the Plain. It was a very marshy and actually rather sandy area when Raffles first came here. But it was decided that this should be the village green, if you like, of Singapore in those days, particularly in the colonial times. And so gradually, over a period of time, various different buildings were put up around this area. This sweep here, where the National Gallery is today, which of course consists of two buildings, the old Supreme Court building and the old City Hall building, built in 1939 and 1929 respectively, previously had lots of beautiful colonial homes. This was a whole series of rich colonial people basically who had set up businesses in Singapore, and they built their homes right here opposite the greenery of the Padang. Over the years there have been rumours that they're going to develop the Padang and build on it, but fortunately that's never happened. And I don't think it ever will now, because it holds a special place in Singaporeans' hearts as being the place that the first National Day parade was held in 1966, and it continues to be the place where many of our National Day parades are held, including this year, albeit a sort of virtual one this year. And of course over here we have the cricket club. You can just about see it over the bushes here, and that is the second oldest sporting institution in Singapore after horse racing. So cricket, of course, must be played by British people particularly, but others, Australians and Indians and so forth as well. So it's a beautiful old building, and some of the architecture was done by Swan and McLaren, who were our architects of choice way back at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. They were responsible for many of the beautiful buildings around Singapore, including Raffles Hotel, the Goodwood Park Hotel, and many others. Looking this way, we have yet more beautiful old colonial buildings. The Victoria Hall. Oh, and the chimes are there right at the right time. What time is it? 12:30. These are the Westminster Chimes, so they're the same chimes as you hear from Big Ben in London. And when they completely restored the Victoria Halls back in 2010 to 2014, people came from the London area to basically restore the bells in the clock tower. I'm always happy to hear them, it reminds me of London. So let's take a little walk this way. What's really nice to see is that these buildings are all preserved. They're all monuments, historic monuments. We have 75 of those in Singapore, and most of these buildings, all these buildings around here really, come under that preservation of monuments concept, which is wonderful. And many of them, of course, are involved in the arts in one way or the other. So the Victoria Hall has a concert area, it has a theatre, and that's as it should be, because in fact when the theatre side was built originally, it was partly as a town hall and partly as a theatre. So it goes back quite a long way to the middle of the 19th century, in fact. Whereas this side, the concert hall, dates from the early 20th century. It is actually officially called the Victoria Memorial Hall and was built in honour of Queen Victoria on her death. So two parts, although when you look at them, you would never know that they were built over about 50 or so years apart. So beautiful building, beautifully restored, beautifully painted, and it's a place that we quite often come into and talk about its history. I want to take you back to the building across the road for a moment, across here, which is where we started with the little elephant, of course. This is the old Parliament building, and it has the distinction of being the oldest surviving building in Singapore. It dates from 1827, and it was designed by George Coleman, who was the first architect in Singapore. He came from Ireland. He came here via India and Indonesia, so he definitely has influences of Georgian architecture, but also Asian influences from the different places that he lived. And he came up with this beautiful building, which is to say was originally in fact a law courts, but before that it was actually built or designed for a Scottish merchant, and a lot of scandal was surrounded that whole idea. Again, come on one of our tours if you want to learn more about that. But suffice to say, it then became the law courts, it then became the Parliament building, and these days again it is involved with the arts, hence its name, the Arts House. The Arts House at the Old Parliament. So there's concerts, there's plays, there's arts exhibitions, all kinds of things going on in normal times. It's also one of the central hubs for the Writers' Festival, which takes place around this time of the year, every year, but this year again it's virtual, of course. So let's take a little walk down to the river here, and we will be passing by the Asian Civilizations Museum on our left. Another beautiful building, which was used originally as government offices. It was just in fact called Government Building. And in more recent years, of course, it became our foremost museum for a while, whilst the National Museum was being revamped and before the National Gallery was opened. I had the privilege of being a docent in this museum right at the beginning when it first opened back in, I think it was 2002. So it's been really wonderful to see that it's expanding its collection and the like, and all the different things that they're doing there. So down we go to the river, and of course we have Sir Stamford Raffles, as I said before, in approximately the place that he landed at the end of January 1819, but we're not quite sure exactly where he landed. This actually is a copy of the original statue which stands down there in front of Victoria Halls, which is a black statue. This is a white version, polymarble. But otherwise it's a complete replica of the other one. And this one was put up for the 150th anniversary of Raffles arriving, so in 1969. Whereas the older one was for the 100th anniversary of his arrival in Singapore. And we're down by the river. And well, there's so much to talk about the Singapore River. It's our main artery in Singapore. It's always been incredibly important for trade here. There are so many stories to talk about regarding the old go-downs, the warehouses that used to be here. Of course, it's wonderful that Boat Quay is yet another conservation area where we've still got a lot of the old houses which have been preserved, thank goodness. And of course we have the complete contrast of all these high-rise skyscrapers next to it. So Raffles' plan said that this side of the river should be for government, that side of the river should be for business, and basically it's still the same. So I think Sir Stamford will be quite happy if he's looking down at us to say, yeah, my urban plan, my city plan worked, and they're still adhering to it. Thank you, Sir Stamford.